can't believe my husband divorced me. Why now when I need him the most?
The day she stopped walking was the day he stopped loving her. Picture this, a woman who spent 20 years building her husband's dreams, sacrificing everything she had, lying in a hospital bed after a devastating accident. And the man she loved, the man she believed would stand by her forever, looks down at her wheelchair and says 5 words that would shatter her world: "You're dead weight to me now." He walked away. Filed for divorce. Started a new life. He thought he was leaving behind a burden, a wife who could no longer serve his image of perfection. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined in his worst nightmare, was that the woman he abandoned, the woman he called worthless, was secretly worth $2.8 billion. She had hidden her fortune for 20 years, choosing love over wealth, authenticity over luxury. And when he finally discovered the truth, when he realized what he had thrown away, it was already too late. This is not fiction. This is not a fairy tale. This happened. And what you're about to hear will change the way you think about love, loyalty, and what people truly value when everything falls apart. Before we go any further into this incredible true story, I need you to do something for me. If you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now. We share real stories about real people, stories that will make you think, make you feel, and maybe even change your perspective on life. And if you're already part of our community, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Are you in New York? Los Angeles? Maybe you're watching from across the world in London, Tokyo, or Sydney. We love hearing from you, and it helps us understand our global family. Also, give this video a thumbs up if you're ready for a story that will stay with you long after it ends. Trust me, you're going to want to share this one. Now, let's get into it. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell was 22 years old when she first saw Robert Hayes in the library of Ohio State Community College. It was a Tuesday evening in April 1985, and the spring air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass through the open windows. Sarah had been working double shifts at University Hospital, her second job alongside her position at a local diner, trying to scrape together enough money for nursing school tuition. Her hands smelled like antiseptic and coffee, her back ached from 12-hour shifts, but she was determined. She came from money, serious money, but nobody knew that. Her grandfather, William Mitchell, had built one of the most successful private investment firms in American history, Mitchell Capital Group, starting with a single office in Manhattan in 1947. By the time he died in 1979, he had turned a $10,000 loan into a multi-billion-dollar empire. He had 2 children, Sarah's father and aunt, both of whom he considered financially irresponsible and emotionally immature. In his will, he did something unusual. He bypassed his own children entirely and left everything to his granddaughter Sarah, the only family member he believed had inherited his values of hard work, humility, and genuine care for others. The inheritance was structured as a trust that Sarah would gain full access to at age 25. Until then, she received a modest monthly allowance, enough to cover basic expenses but nothing extravagant. Sarah's parents were furious, but there was nothing they could do. The will was ironclad. So Sarah grew up knowing she would one day inherit a fortune, but she was raised by her grandfather to understand that wealth without character was worthless, that money revealed people's true nature, and that she should never let her bank account define her worth as a human being. When Sarah met Robert that evening in the library, she was 3 years away from accessing her trust fund. She had already decided she would never tell anyone about her wealth. She had watched her mother go through 3 marriages, each one ending when the men realized the money wasn't directly accessible or when they showed their true colors. She had seen family friends treated differently once people learned their net worth. She wanted something real. Something built on genuine connection rather than financial security. Robert was standing at the circulation desk, frantically searching through his backpack. He had an economics exam the next morning and had forgotten his calculator. The library didn't lend them out, and the bookstore was closed. Sarah watched him for a moment, noticed the stress in his shoulders, the way his hands shook slightly as he checked his pockets again and again. She walked over quietly and tapped his shoulder. "Hey," she said softly. "I have an extra calculator. You can borrow it if you want." Robert turned around, and their eyes met for the first time. He had kind eyes, Sarah noticed. Tired, stressed, but kind. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice filled with relief. "Yeah, of course. I'm Sarah." She handed him a small scientific calculator from her bag. "I'm Robert. Robert Hayes. Thank you so much. I'll bring it back tomorrow, I promise." Sarah smiled. "Keep it. I have another one at home." That small act of kindness, that moment of generosity without expecting anything in return, sparked a conversation that lasted 3 hours. They sat at a corner table surrounded by dusty textbooks and empty coffee cups, talking about everything and nothing. Robert told her about growing up in a small town in Kentucky, the youngest of 4 kids, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. He talked about his dreams of making something of himself, of proving wrong everyone who said he would end up like his father, a man who abandoned the family when Robert was 7. Sarah listened, really listened, in a way that made Robert feel seen for the first time in his life. Sarah shared carefully selected pieces of her own story. She talked about nursing school, about wanting to help people, about believing that everyone deserved dignity and care regardless of their circumstances. She didn't mention the trust fund or her grandfather's empire. She didn't mention that the used Honda Accord she drove was a deliberate choice when she could have afforded any car in the world. She presented herself as exactly what she appeared to be, a hard-working college student trying to build a future. By the time the library closed at 11 that night, Robert knew he wanted to see Sarah again. There was something about her that was different from anyone he had ever met. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't talk about material things or social status. She asked questions about his dreams, his fears, his hopes for the future. She made him feel like his thoughts mattered, like his ambitions were valid even though he came from nothing. "Can I take you to dinner sometime?" Robert asked as they walked out of the library into the cool spring night. Sarah hesitated for just a moment. She knew that saying yes would start something, and once it started, maintaining the secret of her wealth would become more complicated. But there was something about Robert that drew her in. Maybe it was his vulnerability, his honesty about his struggles, his determination to build something better. Maybe it was the way he looked at her like she was someone special, not because of what she had but because of who she was. "I'd like that," Sarah said, and smiled. Over the next 2 years, Sarah and Robert built a relationship that felt, at least to Sarah, remarkably pure. They went on cheap dates, walks in the park, pizza from the dollar menu, movies at the second-run theater where tickets cost $3. Robert was always apologetic about not being able to afford nicer things, but Sarah genuinely didn't care. She had grown up around wealth and knew that expensive restaurants and luxury vacations didn't create connection. What mattered was the way Robert remembered her favorite coffee order, the way he walked her to her car every night even when it was out of his way, the way he listened when she talked about her patients at the hospital with genuine interest and empathy. Robert introduced Sarah to his mother, a weathered woman with kind eyes and calloused hands who worked as a housekeeper at a hotel. She liked Sarah immediately. "This one's different," she told Robert after Sarah left that first dinner. "She's got something real about her. Don't mess this up." Robert had no intention of messing it up. By the end of their second year together, he was certain Sarah was the woman he wanted to marry. He saved up for 3 months to buy a modest engagement ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that cost him $800, nearly his entire savings. He proposed on a bench overlooking the river where they had gone on their first real date. "Sarah," he said, his voice shaking with nervousness and hope, "I know I don't have much. I know I can't give you the world right now. But I promise you, I'm going to work harder than anyone you've ever met. I'm going to build a life for us. I'm going to make you proud. Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at the ring, then at Robert's face, and saw genuine love there. Not love for what she could provide, not love based on status or wealth, but love for the person he believed she was. She said yes, knowing that she was about to commit to a lifetime of maintaining a secret that could destroy everything if it ever came out wrong. They married in June 1987 at Sarah's childhood home in Canton, Ohio. It was a small ceremony with 23 guests, mostly Robert's family and a few close friends from college. Sarah's parents attended but left early, still bitter about the inheritance situation and disapproving of Sarah's choice to marry someone they considered beneath their social class. Sarah wore a borrowed wedding dress from her cousin Jessica, a simple white gown with lace sleeves that fit her perfectly. Robert wore a suit from the thrift store that he had carefully tailored to fit properly. They exchanged vows under a maple tree in the backyard, promising to love each other in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do them part. Sarah meant every word. She believed Robert did too. The reception was potluck style, with guests bringing homemade dishes and desserts. There was no DJ, just a cassette player with a collection of love songs. Robert's mother cried during their first dance. Sarah's best friend from nursing school, Amanda, pulled her aside at one point and whispered, "Are you sure about this? You know you could have anyone." Sarah looked across the yard at Robert, who was laughing with his brothers, his face lit up with pure joy. "I don't want anyone," she said. "I want him." And in that moment, she truly believed that love would be enough. Their first apartment was a one-bedroom walk-up on the east side of Columbus, a neighborhood that smelled like exhaust and fried food. The rent was $450 a month, which took nearly half of Robert's entry-level salary at a manufacturing company where he worked as an assistant manager. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, the refrigerator made a grinding noise that kept them awake at night, and the radiator clanked so loudly in winter that their downstairs neighbor complained constantly. But it was theirs. Sarah could have easily purchased a house outright from her trust fund, which she had gained full access to just 2 years into their marriage. By then, the initial inheritance of $47 million had grown through careful management to nearly $65 million. But revealing that wealth would mean explaining why she had hidden it, would mean answering questions about trust and honesty that Sarah wasn't ready to face. So she continued working as a nurse, continued living modestly, continued pretending that their financial struggles were real. She told herself it was about protecting their relationship, about ensuring Robert loved her for the right reasons. But deep down, she was also testing him. Testing whether he would remain kind and loving even when things were difficult. Testing whether his promises of partnership would hold up under the stress of bills and budget constraints. And for the first few years, Robert passed every test. He worked long hours at the manufacturing plant, often coming home exhausted and smelling like machine oil and sweat. But he never complained. He would kiss Sarah hello, ask about her day at the hospital, help with dinner even though he was clearly worn out. On weekends, he studied for professional certifications that might help him advance in his career. Sarah would find him at 3 in the morning at their tiny kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and notes, drinking instant coffee and pushing himself to be better, to earn more, to provide a more comfortable life for them. "You don't have to do this," Sarah would say, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "We're okay." "I want more than okay for you," Robert would reply, squeezing her hand. "You deserve more than this apartment, more than struggling to pay bills, more than worrying about whether we can afford to go out to dinner. You work so hard, Sarah. You take care of everyone else. I want to take care of you." Those moments made Sarah's heart ache with love and guilt. She was watching her husband exhaust himself trying to provide a better life when she could solve all their financial problems with a single phone call. But she couldn't bring herself to tell him. Not yet. Not when everything between them felt so pure and uncomplicated. She told herself she would reveal the truth eventually, maybe after Robert achieved some career success of his own, maybe after they had been married long enough that he would understand why she had kept the secret. But the right moment never seemed to come, and with each passing year, the secret grew heavier and harder to confess. By 1995, 10 years into their marriage, Robert's career had taken off in ways neither of them had anticipated. His work ethic, combined with a natural talent for logistics and management, caught the attention of senior executives at his company. He was promoted to regional director, overseeing manufacturing operations across Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. His salary jumped from $38,000 a year to $95,000, a number that seemed almost incomprehensible to Robert, who had grown up in poverty. They moved out of the cramped apartment and bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a suburb of Columbus, a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and good schools, even though they didn't have children. The house cost $140,000, and they took out a mortgage that would take 30 years to pay off. Sarah could have written a check for the full amount without making a dent in her portfolio, which had now grown to over $200 million through strategic investments in emerging technology companies and international markets. But she didn't. She signed the mortgage papers alongside Robert, watched him beam with pride at becoming a homeowner, and kept her secret locked away. The house had a backyard with a garden, a 2-car garage, and enough space that Sarah no longer felt cramped. But more importantly to Robert, it was a symbol. A symbol that he had made it, that he had climbed out of poverty, that he could provide for his wife the way a man was supposed to. Sarah noticed a shift in Robert during this time. Success suited him, but it also changed him in subtle ways that made her uneasy. He started paying more attention to appearances. He bought expensive suits for work, upgraded his car to a new BMW, joined a country club where he could network with other executives. Sarah didn't object to any of this. They could afford it on his salary, and she understood that in the corporate world, image mattered. But what bothered her was the way Robert started treating her differently in social situations. At company events and parties, he began introducing her in ways that diminished her identity. "This is my wife, Sarah," he would say, without adding anything else. No mention of her nursing career, which she had continued even after they could afford for her not to work. No acknowledgement of the fact that she had supported him through the early years when he was building his career. Just, "my wife, Sarah," as if she were an accessory rather than a partner. When people asked what Sarah did, Robert would often answer for her before she could speak. "Sarah takes care of the home front," he would say with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Keeps everything running smoothly so I can focus on work." It wasn't technically a lie. Sarah had reduced her nursing hours to part-time so she could manage their household, attend Robert's work functions, and support his increasingly demanding career. But the way Robert phrased it made her sound like a housewife with no other identity or purpose, which wasn't true and wasn't fair. Sarah tried to address this with him one evening after a particularly uncomfortable dinner party. "Robert," she said carefully as they drove home, "when people ask what I do, I'd prefer to answer for myself." Robert glanced at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Tonight, when that woman from accounting asked about my work, you jumped in before I could respond. You made it sound like I don't do anything except manage the house." "That's not what I meant," Robert said defensively. "I was just explaining that you support my career. That's important, Sarah. Do you know how many of my colleagues wish they had wives who were as supportive as you?" "I appreciate that," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "But I'm also still a nurse. I still work at the hospital 2 days a week. I have an identity beyond being your wife." Robert was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how it sounded. I'll be more conscious of it." But he wasn't. If anything, it got worse. Over the next few years, as Robert's career continued to climb and his social circle expanded to include wealthier and more influential people, Sarah felt herself shrinking. At company galas and networking events, she would stand beside Robert in expensive dresses that he picked out, smiling and making small talk while feeling increasingly invisible. Other executives' wives seemed content with this role, discussing interior decorators and vacation homes and charity committees. But Sarah had spent years working in emergency rooms, holding the hands of dying patients, making life-or-death decisions under pressure. She had an Ivy League education in nursing that she had paid for herself, before accessing her trust fund. She had skills, knowledge, and experiences that mattered. But in Robert's world, none of that seemed relevant. She started declining invitations to company events, claiming headaches or previous commitments. Robert didn't seem to notice or care. He would go without her, sometimes staying out until 2 or 3 in the morning, networking and drinking with colleagues and clients. Sarah would lie awake in their bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly her marriage had shifted from partnership to performance. She thought about telling Robert the truth about her wealth during this time. Maybe if he knew that she was independently wealthy, that she didn't need him to provide for her, it would reset their dynamic. Maybe it would remind him that she had chosen to be with him, not because she needed his money but because she loved him. But every time she considered revealing the secret, something held her back. Pride, maybe. Or fear. Fear that Robert's love, which had felt so pure and genuine in the early years, would change if he knew. Fear that he would see her differently, treat her differently, maybe even resent her for having more money than he could ever earn. So she stayed silent and watched her marriage slowly transform into something she no longer recognized. By 2000, Robert was a senior vice president at his company, earning over $250,000 a year. They had been married 13 years. They had a beautiful home, expensive cars, membership at an exclusive country club. On paper, they had achieved the American dream. But Sarah had never felt more alone. Robert traveled constantly, sometimes gone for a week at a time for conferences and client meetings. When he was home, he was distracted, always on his phone or laptop, responding to emails and preparing presentations. Their conversations became transactional, focused on schedules and logistics rather than emotions or dreams. They stopped having date nights. Stopped taking vacations together. Stopped having meaningful conversations about anything that mattered. Sarah threw herself into volunteer work during this period. She joined the board of directors for the local children's hospital, using her nursing background to advocate for better pediatric care. She started donating to medical research, carefully routing the money through her trust fund in ways that couldn't be traced back to her publicly. She found fulfillment in using her wealth to make a difference, even if she couldn't share that part of her life with her husband. She also reconnected with her financial advisor, Marcus Thompson, who had been managing her investments since she gained access to her trust fund at 25. Marcus had watched Sarah's portfolio grow from $65 million to over $1 billion through careful management, strategic diversification, and timely investments in emerging markets. He was one of the few people who knew about Sarah's double life, and he had always been slightly uncomfortable with it. "Sarah," Marcus said during one of their quarterly meetings in early 2003, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about the answer. Why are you still hiding this from your husband?" Sarah stared at the financial report spread across the conference table. Her net worth had just crossed $1.8 billion. She was one of the wealthiest women in America, and her husband had no idea. "Because," Sarah said slowly, "the moment I tell him, everything changes. He'll look at me differently. He'll question every moment of our marriage. He'll wonder if I was testing him, manipulating him, lying to him." "You were lying to him," Marcus pointed out gently. "By omission, maybe, but still lying." "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know it's wrong. But I'm trapped now, Marcus. If I tell him after 18 years of marriage, he'll never forgive me for keeping it secret this long. And if I don't tell him, I have to keep living this double life forever." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "What if something happens to you, Sarah? What if you get sick or injured? Your medical directives, your will, all of that lists your actual net worth. If something happens and Robert finds out that way, it will be even worse." Sarah knew Marcus was right, but she couldn't bring herself to have that conversation with Robert. Their marriage was already strained. Adding this revelation would either fix everything or destroy it completely, and Sarah was terrified to find out which. "I'll think about it," she told Marcus. "I promise." But she never got the chance to tell Robert on her own terms. Because 6 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in October, Sarah's entire life changed in the span of 3 seconds. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. I also want to know what you're thinking right now. Do you think Sarah was wrong to hide her wealth from Robert for all those years? Or do you understand why she did it? Was she protecting herself, or was she being dishonest? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing your perspectives on these complex situations. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button now because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you absolutely stunned. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. October 14th, 2003, started like any other Tuesday. Sarah woke up at 6:30 in the morning to the sound of Robert's alarm. He was already in the shower, preparing for an early meeting with potential investors from Japan. Sarah made coffee, set out his breakfast, and kissed him goodbye as he rushed out the door at 7:15. "I'll be home late," Robert said, barely making eye contact. "Probably won't be back until after 10. "Okay," Sarah said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "I'll save you some dinner." But Robert was already gone, his mind already at the office, already running through presentation slides and talking points. Sarah spent the morning at a board meeting for the Children's Hospital, discussing the expansion of the pediatric oncology wing. She had quietly donated $5 million to the project through her foundation, money that the board believed came from an anonymous benefactor. Sitting in that conference room, listening to doctors and administrators talk about saving children's lives, Sarah felt more purposeful than she had in months. This was what money should be used for. Not expensive cars or country club memberships, but making tangible differences in people's lives. The meeting ended at noon. Sarah had planned to grab lunch with her friend Amanda, her old nursing school classmate who now worked as a hospital administrator. But Amanda had to cancel last minute due to a staffing emergency, so Sarah decided to head home instead. She stopped at the grocery store, picked up ingredients for Robert's favorite meal even though he probably wouldn't appreciate it, and loaded the bags into her Honda Accord. The car was 15 years old, still running perfectly, a deliberate choice by Sarah to maintain the appearance of modest means. She could have driven a Mercedes or a Range Rover, but she drove a Honda because that's what made sense for someone living on a nurse's part-time salary. She pulled out of the grocery store parking lot at 1:23 in the afternoon and headed east on Route 44 toward home. The sky was clear, traffic was light, and Sarah was thinking about what vegetables to include with dinner. She approached the intersection of Route 44 and Miller Road, slowing down as the light ahead turned yellow. She stopped. Waited for the light to change. Never saw the semi-truck barreling through the intersection from the north, the driver distracted by his phone, running the red light at 60 miles per hour. The impact was instantaneous and devastating. The semi-truck slammed into the driver's side of Sarah's Honda with the force of a small explosion. The car crumpled like paper, glass shattering in every direction, metal twisting and screaming as the Honda spun across the intersection and slammed into a traffic light pole. Witnesses later described the sound as something they would never forget, a noise that combined screeching metal, breaking glass, and something else they couldn't quite identify but that haunted their dreams for months afterward. Sarah didn't remember the impact itself. One moment she was sitting at a red light, the next moment she was waking up in a helicopter, surrounded by paramedics shouting medical terminology she recognized from her nursing career but couldn't quite process through the fog of pain and shock. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" a young paramedic was saying, his face close to hers. "Blink if you can hear me." Sarah blinked. Everything hurt. Everything. "Good, that's good. We're taking you to Cleveland Metro. You've been in an accident. Do you understand?" Sarah tried to nod but couldn't move her head. She tried to speak but couldn't form words. Panic started to set in, the kind of panic she had seen in trauma patients but never experienced herself. Why couldn't she move? Why couldn't she feel her legs? Heart rate spiking, another voice said. "Give me 2 of morphine." The world went soft and blurry after that. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as the helicopter flew through the clear October sky. She heard fragments of conversation, medical assessments, worried tones. Significant spinal trauma at T6. Multiple fractures to the left femur and tibia. Possible internal bleeding. Get trauma team ready for immediate surgery. None of it felt real. Sarah kept thinking about the groceries in her car, about whether anyone had called Robert, about the dinner she wouldn't be making tonight. Strange, irrelevant thoughts that her brain clung to because the alternative, understanding the severity of what had just happened, was too overwhelming to process. They landed on the roof of Cleveland Metro Hospital at 2:07 in the afternoon. Sarah was rushed into emergency surgery, surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses who worked frantically to stabilize her injuries. The surgery lasted 6 hours. They repaired her broken bones, stopped internal bleeding from a lacerated spleen, and carefully assessed the damage to her spinal cord. Dr. Raymond Chen, the attending neurosurgeon, knew within the first hour that Sarah's life would never be the same. Robert received the call at 2:45 in the afternoon. He was in the middle of his presentation to the Japanese investors when his secretary knocked on the conference room door, apologizing profusely but insisting that Mr. Hayes needed to take an urgent call from Cleveland Metro Hospital. Robert's first thought was that something had happened to his mother. She was 68 now, living alone in Kentucky, and her health had been declining. He excused himself from the meeting and took the call in the hallway, his heart pounding with anxiety. "Mr. Hayes," a calm female voice said. "This is Jennifer Morrison from Cleveland Metro Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Sarah Hayes." Robert's legs nearly gave out. "What happened? Is she okay?" "Your wife was involved in a serious motor vehicle accident. She's currently in surgery. I need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." "Surgery? How serious?" Robert's voice cracked. "Is she going to be okay?" "I can't give you specific details over the phone, Mr. Hayes. But you should come now. The trauma unit is on the 4th floor." Robert dropped his phone twice trying to end the call, his hands shaking so badly he could barely control them. He ran back into the conference room, grabbed his jacket, and stammered something about a family emergency. His colleagues assured him they would handle the investors. Robert didn't care. Didn't care about the deal, the promotion he had been angling for, the impression he was making. All he could think about was Sarah. The drive to Cleveland Metro normally took 45 minutes. Robert made it in 28, speeding through traffic, running yellow lights, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When he burst into the trauma unit waiting room, a nurse directed him to a private consultation room where he would wait for updates from surgery. The next 6 hours were the longest of Robert's life. He paced the small room, called Sarah's friends and family, stared at the clock as minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. At 8:37 that evening, Dr. Chen finally entered the consultation room, still in his surgical scrubs, his face grave but professional. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Dr. Chen. I was the lead surgeon on your wife's case. Is she alive?" Robert asked, the only question that mattered. "Yes, she's alive. The surgery went as well as we could have hoped. We've stabilized her condition." Robert felt his knees buckle with relief. He sat down hard in a plastic chair, putting his head in his hands. "Can I see her?" "Soon," Dr. Chen said. "But first, I need to talk to you about Sarah's injuries." Something in the doctor's tone made Robert's relief evaporate instantly. "What is it? What's wrong?" Dr. Chen sat down across from Robert, his expression compassionate but direct. "Your wife sustained a complete spinal cord injury at the T6 vertebrae. Do you understand what that means?" Robert shook his head, unable to speak. "It means that Sarah's spinal cord was severed at the middle of her thoracic spine. We've stabilized the fracture and prevented further damage, but the injury itself is permanent. Sarah will have full use of her arms and upper body, but she will not have voluntary control of her legs. She will not be able to walk again. The words hit Robert like physical blows. "What?" he whispered. "What do you mean she won't walk again? You said the surgery went well. You said you stabilized her." "We did stabilize her," Dr. Chen explained patiently. "We prevented the injury from getting worse, and we addressed all the other trauma from the accident. But the spinal cord injury itself cannot be repaired with current medical technology. Sarah will be paralyzed from approximately the mid-chest down for the rest of her life. She will need to use a wheelchair for mobility." Robert stared at the doctor, his brain refusing to accept what he was hearing. "But there must be something you can do. Physical therapy, surgery, experimental treatments. There will be extensive physical therapy to help Sarah adapt to her new physical reality and maintain her upper body strength. But there is no treatment that will restore function to her legs. I'm very sorry, Mr. Hayes. I know this is devastating news." Devastating didn't begin to cover it. Robert felt like he was drowning, like the walls of the consultation room were closing in on him. Sarah, his vibrant, independent wife who had worked as a nurse her entire adult life, who loved hiking and gardening and dancing, would never walk again. She would be in a wheelchair. Permanently. Forever. Dr. Chen continued talking, explaining about rehabilitation timelines and accessibility modifications and support resources, but Robert barely heard him. His mind was spinning with implications. How would this affect his career? Company events required a sophisticated, socially adept spouse. Could Sarah attend functions in a wheelchair? What would people think? What would they say? He hated himself for thinking these thoughts even as they poured through his mind unbidden. His wife was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her future, and he was worried about appearances. What kind of person did that make him? "Can I see her now?" Robert asked, interrupting whatever Dr. Chen had been saying. "Of course. Follow me." Sarah was in the ICU, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, tubes and wires connected to her body at multiple points. Her eyes were closed, her face pale and bruised, a bandage wrapped around her head. Robert stood in the doorway for a long moment, unable to make himself enter the room. This couldn't be his Sarah. This broken, fragile person connected to machines couldn't be the woman he had kissed goodbye this morning. But it was. Robert forced himself to walk to her bedside, to take her hand gently in his. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. When she saw Robert, tears immediately started streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had removed after surgery. "I'm so sorry." Robert felt his own eyes fill with tears. "Sorry. Sarah, you have nothing to be sorry for. This wasn't your fault." "I ruined everything," Sarah said, her words barely audible. "I ruined our lives." "No," Robert said, squeezing her hand. "No, you didn't ruin anything. You're alive. That's all that matters. We'll figure everything else out together." But even as Robert said the words, even as he genuinely meant them in that moment, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a question he couldn't silence. What does together even mean now? Sarah seemed to hear that unspoken question in the silence that followed. She looked at Robert with an expression that broke his heart, an expression of fear and vulnerability and desperate hope that he would prove worthy of the vows he had made 18 years ago. "Will you still love me?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "Even like this?" Robert wanted to say yes without hesitation. Wanted to declare his unconditional love and commitment. But the pause before his answer, the brief moment of hesitation while he processed the question, told Sarah everything she needed to know. Sarah spent the next 3 months in the Cleveland Metro Hospital Rehabilitation Center, learning how to navigate the world from a wheelchair. The physical therapy was grueling, not because it would restore her ability to walk but because it taught her how to transfer from bed to chair, chair to car, how to build the upper body strength necessary for independent mobility, how to manage the daily realities of paralysis that nobody talks about until they have to live them. Robert visited regularly at first, coming to the hospital every day after work for the first 2 weeks. But Sarah noticed patterns emerging that made her heart sink with each passing day. Robert would stand near the door of her room rather than sitting beside her bed. He would check his phone constantly during visits. His eyes would drift to her wheelchair with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read, but that felt like disgust, pity, resentment, or some combination of all three. He never asked about her therapy sessions, never wanted to hear about the progress she was making in regaining independence. When Sarah tried to share small victories, like successfully transferring to the toilet by herself or navigating the cafeteria in her wheelchair without assistance, Robert would nod absently and change the subject to work or bills or other logistics. By week 3, Robert's visits decreased to every other day. By week 6, twice a week. By week 10, once a week if Sarah was lucky. He always had excuses. Work was busy. He had a business trip. He wasn't feeling well. The excuses were probably even true, but the underlying message was clear: Robert didn't want to be there. Didn't want to see his wife learning to live with a disability. Didn't want to confront what their future together would look like. Sarah's physical therapist, a woman named Karen who specialized in spinal cord injuries, noticed the pattern. "How are things with your husband?" she asked one afternoon after a particularly difficult session. Sarah was exhausted, her arms shaking from the effort of wheeling herself through an obstacle course designed to simulate real-world challenges. "He's busy with work," Sarah said, the automatic response she had perfected over the past months. Karen sat down on the mat beside Sarah's wheelchair, her expression kind but direct. "Sarah, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've worked with hundreds of patients adjusting to spinal cord injuries. And I've seen how their support systems respond. Some families rally. Some fall apart. But the ones that fall apart always follow the same pattern. Decreased visits. Increased emotional distance. Avoidance of difficult conversations about the future." "What are you saying?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "I'm saying that you need to have an honest conversation with Robert about what comes next. About whether he's willing and able to be your partner through this adjustment period. Because right now, from what I can see, he's already checked out emotionally. And that's going to make your recovery much harder." Sarah wanted to defend Robert, to insist that he was just struggling with his own adjustment to the situation, that he needed time to process. But she couldn't. Because Karen was right. Robert had checked out. The man who visited her once a week for 30-minute increments was not the man she had married. He was a stranger fulfilling an obligation, counting down the minutes until he could leave. That night, Sarah called Robert and asked him to come to the hospital. They needed to talk. Robert arrived 2 hours later, looking annoyed at the inconvenience. Sarah had wheeled herself to a private consultation room, wanting this conversation to happen somewhere other than her hospital room. "What's so urgent?" Robert asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "We need to talk about what happens when I leave the hospital," Sarah said calmly. "I'm scheduled for discharge in 3 weeks. The house isn't accessible for a wheelchair. We need to make modifications or consider moving somewhere that's already set up properly." Robert sighed, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Sarah had seen increasingly often. "Can't we just put in a ramp at the front door and some grab bars in the bathroom?" "Robert, our bedroom is upstairs. The master bathroom is upstairs. The laundry room is in the basement. I can't access any of those spaces in a wheelchair. We need to either do major renovations or find a new house. Do you have any idea how expensive that would be?" Robert snapped. "Do you know what kind of financial strain we're already under with your medical bills?" Sarah felt anger flash through her for the first time. "The medical bills are covered by insurance. You know that. I've made sure everything is handled." "Insurance doesn't cover everything, Sarah. There are co-pays, deductibles, equipment costs. And now you want to renovate the entire house or buy a new one? On my salary?" "Our salary," Sarah corrected. I'm planning to return to nursing once I've completed rehabilitation. There are positions I can do from a wheelchair. Robert laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Come on, Sarah. Be realistic. You can't work as a nurse anymore. You can barely take care of yourself. How are you going to take care of patients? The words hit Sarah like a slap. I can take care of myself just fine. I've been learning adaptive techniques. I'm regaining independence every day. And there are plenty of nursing positions that don't require being on your feet. Administrative roles, case management, phone triage. You're living in a fantasy world, Robert said, his voice cold. This is our reality now. You're disabled. You're going to need help for the rest of your life. And I didn't sign up for this. There it was. The truth Robert had been avoiding for 3 months, finally spoken out loud. Sarah felt something inside her break, but she kept her voice steady. What exactly did you sign up for, Robert? Because I seem to remember vows about sickness and health. Don't throw that in my face, Robert said, standing up and pacing the small room. Those are just words people say at weddings. Nobody actually expects to become a full-time caretaker for their spouse at 45 years old. I don't need a caretaker, Sarah said, her voice rising. I need a partner. I need someone who believes in me, who supports me while I adapt to this new reality. That's not caretaking. That's marriage. Well, maybe I'm not cut out for this kind of marriage, Robert shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at her husband, really seeing him clearly for the first time in years. This man was not who she thought he was. Maybe he never had been. Maybe his kindness and love in the early years had been conditional all along, based on what Sarah could provide him: support for his career, an attractive partner for social events, an easy life without complications. Then leave, Sarah said quietly. What? Robert stopped pacing, surprised by her response. If you're not cut out for this marriage, then leave. File for divorce. Walk away. But stop pretending you're going to stay while emotionally abandoning me every single day. It's cruel, Robert. It's more cruel than just ending it. Robert stared at her, and Sarah saw something shift in his expression. Relief. He was relieved that she had given him permission to leave. That's when Sarah knew with absolute certainty that her marriage was over. Robert left the hospital that night without another word. Sarah sat in the consultation room for over an hour, processing the conversation, mourning the death of her marriage even though Robert hadn't officially said he was leaving. She knew he would. It was just a matter of time. 3 days later, Robert called and asked Sarah's rehabilitation caseworker to deliver a message. He would be staying with a friend for a while and would send someone to help Sarah move into the guest room when she came home. He couldn't do it himself. He needed space. Sarah received this message with surprising calm. She called Marcus Thompson that same evening. Marcus, it's Sarah. I need you to prepare some paperwork for me. What kind of paperwork? Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. Divorce papers. And I need you to set up a new living arrangement. I'm going to need a fully accessible home, probably something custom built. Money is not an issue. I want it done right. Sarah, are you sure about this? Maybe you and Robert just need time to adjust. He's already gone, Marcus. We both know it. I'm just making it official. And I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. When I walk out of this hospital, I'm walking out as Sarah Mitchell, not Sarah Hayes. I'm going to live as myself, finally. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Okay, Marcus finally said. I'll make it happen. Whatever you need. Thank you. And Marcus? I want to make some charitable donations. Significant ones. To spinal cord research, disability advocacy organizations, accessible housing initiatives. I want to use this experience to help others. Can you set that up? Of course. Sarah, I'm proud of you. This can't be easy. It's not, Sarah admitted, her voice cracking slightly. But it's necessary. I've spent 18 years living a lie to protect a marriage that wasn't real. I'm done with lies. Sarah came home from the rehabilitation center in January 2004. Robert had made minimal modifications to the house, a temporary ramp at the front door that looked like it might collapse at any moment and a few grab bars hastily installed in the downstairs bathroom. The guest room had been cleared out for Sarah to use as a bedroom since she couldn't access the upstairs. Robert wasn't there when Sarah arrived. Her friend Amanda helped her move in, unpacking boxes and arranging furniture while making careful small talk that avoided the obvious tension. That first night alone in the guest room of her own house felt surreal. Sarah could hear Robert moving around upstairs, heard the familiar sounds of him getting ready for bed, taking a shower, watching television. They were in the same house but living completely separate lives. Over the next 6 weeks, their interactions became increasingly sparse and cold. They ate meals separately. Robert left for work before Sarah woke up and came home after she had gone to bed. When they did cross paths, Robert's eyes would slide away from Sarah's wheelchair, unable or unwilling to acknowledge her new reality. Sarah adapted to her new life with remarkable resilience. She hired a personal aide, a kind woman named Patricia who helped with tasks that Sarah couldn't yet manage independently. She started working with an occupational therapist to continue building her skills. She researched accessible housing options and worked with Marcus to purchase land in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where she planned to build a custom home designed specifically for wheelchair accessibility. And she waited. Waited for Robert to say the words they both knew were coming. The words finally came on a cold February evening. Robert walked into the living room where Sarah was reading, holding a manila envelope. His face was expressionless, carefully neutral. "I can't do this anymore," Robert said without preamble. Sarah looked up from her book, her heart pounding but her face calm. "Do what?" "This. Us. I can't be your caretaker, Sarah. That's not what I signed up for when we got married." "I don't need a caretaker," Sarah said quietly. "I need a husband. There's a difference. You need someone to help you shower. Someone to drive you to appointments. Someone to modify this entire house to accommodate your wheelchair. That's not a marriage. That's a nursing home situation." The cruelty of the words took Sarah's breath away. She had spent 18 years supporting this man, believing in him, sacrificing her own identity and dreams to help him succeed. And now, when she needed him most, he was comparing their marriage to a nursing home. "You've changed," Robert continued, his voice cold and detached. "No," Sarah said, tears beginning to form despite her best efforts to stay composed. "I'm still here. I'm still the same person, Robert. I just can't walk anymore." "You're not the same person," Robert insisted. "The woman I married could walk. Could travel. Could be a real partner. Could attend company events and represent me well. You can't do any of that anymore." There it was. The real truth. Robert didn't care about Sarah as a person. He cared about what she could do for him, how she made him look, what she contributed to his image and career. "So that's it?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. 18 years of marriage, and you're just done because I use a wheelchair now?" Robert set the manila envelope on the coffee table. "I've already filed for divorce. The papers are in there. My lawyer says if you sign them without contesting anything, we can be done in 6 weeks. What if I don't sign them?" Sarah asked, not because she wanted to stay married but because she wanted to see if Robert had even considered that possibility. "Then we'll go to court and this will get messy and expensive and take months instead of weeks. But either way, Sarah, this marriage is over. You can accept that gracefully or you can fight it, but the outcome will be the same." Robert straightened his tie, a gesture so automatic and meaningless that it made Sarah want to scream. He was discussing the end of their marriage as if it were a business transaction, as if 18 years of partnership meant nothing more than paperwork to be filed and signed. "I'll sign them," Sarah said quietly. "On one condition." "What condition?" Robert asked warily. "I want you to look at me when you leave this room. Really look at me. Not at the wheelchair. Not at the disability. At me. At the woman who believed in you when nobody else did. The woman who supported you for 18 years. The woman who loved you unconditionally. I want you to look at me and know what you're walking away from." Robert's jaw tightened. For a moment, Sarah thought he might actually do it, might actually see her as a human being rather than an inconvenience. But he didn't. He picked up his jacket, turned toward the door, and walked out without a backward glance. Sarah heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the bedroom door close, and knew with absolute certainty that her marriage was over. She sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the manila envelope on the coffee table. Then she picked up her phone and called Marcus. "He did it," Sarah said when Marcus answered. "He's filing for divorce." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I know this must be incredibly painful." "Actually," Sarah said, surprised to find that she meant it, "I'm relieved. I'm finally free. What do you need from me?" "Review the divorce papers he filed. I'm going to sign them without contesting anything. I don't want his money. I don't want alimony. I just want out. Sarah, you're entitled to half of the marital assets. You don't have to walk away with nothing. Marcus, I'm worth over $2 billion. I don't need half of Robert's retirement account or his stock options. Let him have it all. I just want this to be over so I can move on with my life." "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "If that's what you want. But Sarah, this is going to look very strange to his lawyers and the judge. Most people fight tooth and nail in divorce proceedings, especially after long marriages. When you give up everything without a fight, it's going to raise questions." "Let them wonder," Sarah said. "Robert will get what he thinks he wants, freedom and money. And I'll get what I actually need, distance from a man who showed his true character when I needed him most." The divorce proceedings were shockingly brief. Robert's lawyer had proposed a straightforward settlement. Sarah would keep the house, Robert would keep his retirement accounts and company stock, they would split their joint savings account equally. Sarah's lawyer, carefully instructed by Marcus, accepted every term without negotiation. The judge conducting the hearing seemed genuinely confused by how quickly everything was resolved. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge said, looking at Sarah with concern, "are you certain you don't want to contest any of these terms? After an 18-year marriage, you're entitled to spousal support. You're also entitled to half of all assets acquired during the marriage, which would include a portion of your husband's retirement and stock options." "I'm certain, Your Honor," Sarah said from her wheelchair, her voice steady and clear. "I have no interest in prolonging this process. I accept the terms as proposed." The judge looked at Robert's lawyer, then back at Sarah. "This is highly unusual, especially given your current medical situation and disability. Are you sure you can support yourself financially?" Sarah almost laughed at the irony of the question. "I can support myself, Your Honor. I have resources." "Very well. The divorce is granted on the terms as agreed. You're both free to go." And just like that, 18 years of marriage ended in a courtroom in 45 minutes. Robert walked out without a backward glance, already texting someone on his phone, probably the woman from his office that Sarah had suspected he was seeing. Sarah watched him go, pushed by Patricia toward the parking lot, and felt nothing but relief. She was finally free. Free from pretending. Free from diminishing herself. Free from loving someone who had never truly loved her back. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah moved into her new home in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The property was extraordinary, a custom-built, fully accessible residence on 5 acres overlooking a peaceful lake. Every aspect of the house had been designed with wheelchair access in mind. Wide hallways and doorways. Roll-in showers with built-in seating. Adjustable height countertops in the kitchen. A state-of-the-art elevator that serviced all 3 floors. Automated doors and lighting systems. Beautiful hardwood floors throughout with no carpets or thresholds to navigate. The house had cost $3.2 million to build, a fraction of what Sarah could afford but exponentially more than Robert's salary could have ever provided. For the first time in 18 years, Sarah lived in a way that reflected her actual financial status rather than the modest lifestyle she had maintained to hide her wealth. She hired a small staff, Patricia as her full-time personal aide, a chef named Miguel who prepared healthy meals tailored to Sarah's nutritional needs, a housekeeper named Rosa who maintained the property, and a groundskeeper named Tom who kept the gardens immaculate. She also hired a new financial advisor team to work alongside Marcus, people who specialized in philanthropic giving and impact investing. Sarah was done hiding her wealth. She was ready to use it. Within the first year after her divorce, Sarah donated over $400 million to various causes: spinal cord injury research, disability advocacy organizations, accessible housing initiatives, medical equipment for underserved hospitals, scholarships for nursing students, and pediatric cancer research. She did it all under her real name, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, not Sarah Hayes. She joined the boards of 6 major nonprofit organizations, using her business acumen and personal experience with disability to drive meaningful change in how these organizations served their communities. She became a vocal advocate for disability rights, giving speeches at conferences and universities about the importance of accessibility, the need for better spinal cord injury research funding, and the ways society systematically marginalizes people with disabilities. She was articulate, passionate, and impossible to ignore. The media took notice. Forbes magazine contacted Sarah's publicist in October 2005, requesting an interview for a feature on influential philanthropists. Sarah initially declined, uncomfortable with the idea of public attention after spending so many years deliberately staying out of the spotlight. But Marcus convinced her that the platform could be valuable. "Think about how many people you could reach," Marcus argued during one of their meetings at Sarah's Chapel Hill home. "How many people with spinal cord injuries feel hopeless, feel like their lives are over? You could show them what's possible. You could be the representation that didn't exist when you needed it." Sarah thought about the dark days in the rehabilitation center, when she had felt utterly alone and terrified about her future. She thought about other people going through similar experiences right now, people who needed to see that disability didn't mean the end of a meaningful life. "Okay," Sarah said. "Set up the interview. But I want editorial approval. I don't want them to focus on the tragic accident or the divorce. I want the focus to be on what I'm doing now, the impact I'm making, the future I'm building." The Forbes interview was conducted over 2 days in Sarah's home. The reporter, a woman named Catherine Walsh, was respectful and insightful, asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's philanthropic strategy, her investment philosophy, and her vision for disability advocacy. "Can I ask about your marriage?" Catherine said carefully on the second day of interviews. "I know it ended shortly after your accident. Do you feel comfortable discussing that?" Sarah considered the question. She had avoided talking about Robert publicly, not wanting to seem bitter or vindictive. But Catherine was right that it was part of the story, part of the journey that had brought Sarah to this point. "My ex-husband filed for divorce 4 months after my accident," Sarah said calmly. "He made it clear that my disability changed his perception of our marriage, that he couldn't be a partner to someone in a wheelchair. It was painful at the time, but in retrospect, it was also clarifying." "Clarifying how?" Catherine asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "It showed me who he really was. When everything in my life fell apart, when I lost my mobility and my independence and my sense of identity, he walked away. And that told me everything I needed to know about the foundation of our marriage. He had loved a version of me that was useful to him, that served his needs and his image. He didn't love me as a person, separate from what I could provide. That must have been devastating. It was, Sarah acknowledged. But it was also liberating. Because it forced me to rebuild my life from the ground up, to rediscover who I was outside of that marriage, outside of the role I had been playing. And in doing that, I found a purpose and a sense of self that I never had before. Catherine scribbled notes, then looked up with another question. The Forbes team did some background research, and we discovered that you come from significant generational wealth. Your grandfather founded Mitchell Capital Group. Is it true that you were independently wealthy throughout your entire marriage? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the part she had been dreading, the part that would make her look dishonest or manipulative to people who didn't understand the full context. Yes, that's true. I inherited a substantial trust fund from my grandfather when I was 25, 3 years before I met my ex-husband. By the time we married, I was worth approximately $65 million. By the time we divorced, my net worth had grown to over $2 billion. And your husband never knew? Catherine asked, her expression carefully neutral. He never knew. I kept it hidden deliberately because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. I had watched too many relationships in my family crumble under the weight of wealth. I wanted something real, something built on genuine connection rather than financial security. Do you think hiding it was the right choice? Sarah paused, really considering the question. I think it was a protective choice that made sense to me at the time. Do I wish things had been different? Of course. But I don't regret the decision because it showed me the truth about my marriage. If my ex-husband had known about my wealth, he probably would have stayed after the accident. Not because he loved me, but because he loved the money. By hiding it, I inadvertently created a situation that revealed his true character. And when did he find out about your wealth? I don't know exactly when he discovered it. We haven't spoken since the divorce was finalized. But I imagine he knows now, given the public nature of my philanthropic work. Catherine made more notes, then looked at Sarah with something that seemed like admiration. That's one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard. The fact that you walked away from that divorce asking for nothing, when you could have destroyed him financially if you wanted to. The grace that must have taken. It wasn't grace, Sarah corrected gently. It was self-preservation. I didn't want anything from him. I didn't want to be tied to him financially or emotionally. I just wanted to be free to build a new life. And you can't build something new while you're still fighting battles from the old life. The Forbes article was published in November 2005 with Sarah on the cover. She wore a tailored navy suit, sitting confidently in her wheelchair, her expression calm and self-assured. The headline read, "The Quiet Billionaire, How Sarah Mitchell is Changing Lives While Staying Out of the Spotlight." The article detailed her grandfather's investment empire, her own careful management of the trust fund, and her extensive philanthropic work. It praised her humility during her marriage when she lived modestly despite her wealth. It discussed her accident and divorce with sensitivity, quoting Sarah's comments about the experience being both painful and clarifying. It highlighted the hundreds of millions of dollars she had donated to various causes and the tangible impact that money was making in communities across America. The response was overwhelming. Sarah received thousands of letters and emails from people with spinal cord injuries who felt inspired by her story, from people who had been abandoned by partners during medical crises who felt seen and validated, from disability advocates who thanked her for using her platform to drive change. She also received interview requests from major media outlets, invitations to speak at conferences and universities, and proposals from organizations hoping for funding. Sarah was selective about what opportunities she accepted. She gave a TEDx talk about redefining ability and accessibility that went viral, receiving over 12 million views in the first month. She testified before Congress about the need for increased funding for spinal cord injury research. She partnered with several major universities to establish research programs focused on disability advocacy and accessible design. She lived her life publicly and unapologetically as a disabled billionaire using her resources and platform to create change. And somewhere in Atlanta, Robert Hayes saw the Forbes magazine cover and realized exactly what he had lost. Robert was in his office at the manufacturing company's Atlanta headquarters when his colleague David walked in holding a copy of Forbes magazine. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Robert had been reviewing quarterly reports, his mind occupied with profit margins and efficiency metrics. "Hey, isn't your ex-wife named Sarah?" David asked casually, tossing the magazine onto Robert's desk. Robert frowned, annoyed at the interruption. "She went by Sarah Hayes when we were married." "Why?" "Because there's a Sarah Mitchell on the cover of Forbes. Says she's one of the most influential philanthropists in America. The article mentions she was married before, lived in Ohio, got divorced after a car accident. Thought it might be a weird coincidence." Robert's hands trembled as he picked up the magazine. There on the cover was Sarah. His Sarah. Except she wasn't his anymore, and the woman in the photo looked nothing like the person he remembered. This Sarah was elegant, confident, powerful. She sat in her wheelchair wearing a designer suit, her expression composed and self-assured. She looked like someone who had found herself, who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. The headline made Robert's stomach drop, "The Quiet Billionaire, How Sarah Mitchell is Changing Lives While Staying Out of the Spotlight." He read the article 3 times, each pass making him feel progressively sicker. Sarah Mitchell, heir to the Mitchell Capital Group fortune. Estimated net worth, $2.8 billion. Silent philanthropist who had donated over $500 million in the 18 months since her divorce. Advisor to multiple university endowments. Board member of 6 major nonprofit organizations. Vocal advocate for disability rights and accessible design. The article detailed her grandfather's investment empire, how Sarah had taken control of the trust at 25 and grown it exponentially through strategic management. It mentioned her marriage briefly, noting that she had kept her wealth private during that time, living modestly to avoid public attention and to ensure authentic relationships. It praised her humility and her commitment to using resources for social good rather than personal luxury. There was a photo spread showing Sarah at various events, a charity gala surrounded by prominent business leaders and politicians, a research laboratory where she was funding spinal cord injury studies, a ribbon-cutting ceremony for an accessible housing complex she had funded. In every photo, she looked radiant, purposeful, alive in ways Robert had never seen during their marriage. Robert couldn't breathe. His vision tunneled. His colleague was saying something, but Robert couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. For 18 years, he had lived with a billionaire and never known. Every time he had complained about money, every time he had made Sarah feel inadequate for not contributing more financially, every time he had taken credit for their modest lifestyle as evidence of his hard work and sacrifice, she had been sitting on a fortune that dwarfed anything he would earn in 10 lifetimes. And when she had become disabled, when she had needed him most, he had called her dead weight. He had abandoned her. He had thrown away a woman worth billions because she couldn't walk. The realization hit Robert like a physical blow. He stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. His colleague jumped, startled. "You okay, man? You look like you're about to pass out." Robert couldn't respond. He grabbed the magazine and walked out of his office, down the hallway, into the bathroom where he locked himself in a stall and vomited until there was nothing left in his stomach. He had lost everything. Not the money, though that stung with a pain he hadn't expected. He had lost a woman who had loved him unconditionally, who had believed in him when no one else did, who had sacrificed her own identity to support his dreams. He had lost integrity, respect, basic human decency. He had revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person Sarah had feared when she decided to hide her wealth, someone who valued appearances over substance, convenience over commitment, ability over character. Robert went home sick that day, calling his secretary from the parking lot and telling her to cancel his afternoon meetings. He spent hours sitting in his apartment, a sleek modern space that felt sterile and empty, reading and rereading the Forbes article. Every detail felt like a knife twisting in his gut. Sarah had built an entire life after their divorce. A beautiful, meaningful, impactful life. She was changing the world, helping people, using her resources to fund research that could prevent others from experiencing the trauma she had endured. And what had Robert done? He had gotten a promotion. Started dating Jennifer, a relationship that felt shallow and transactional compared to what he had with Sarah. Bought an expensive car and a nice apartment. Climbed the corporate ladder. None of it meant anything. None of it filled the void he felt when he really stopped to think about his life. Over the following weeks, Robert became obsessed with following Sarah's public appearances. He found videos of her TEDx talk, watched interviews she gave to disability advocacy publications, read articles about the research programs and accessible housing initiatives she funded. Every piece of content showed him a woman who had not just survived the end of their marriage but had thrived in ways he couldn't have imagined. In one interview with a disability rights magazine, Sarah was asked about her ex-husband and the divorce. "My ex-husband taught me an important lesson," Sarah said, her voice calm and thoughtful. "He taught me that love has to be unconditional to be real. When he left after my accident, when he made it clear that my disability made me unworthy of partnership, it hurt. But it also clarified something I needed to understand, that the marriage I thought I had was built on a foundation of conditions and expectations rather than genuine acceptance. And once I understood that, I could let go and build something better." The interviewer asked a follow-up question, "Do you have any anger toward him?" Sarah paused, seeming to genuinely consider the question. "No," she said finally. "I don't have anger. I have disappointment, maybe. Sadness for what could have been if he had been a different kind of person. But anger requires energy and emotional investment, and I've chosen to invest those resources in moving forward rather than looking back." Robert watched that interview sitting on his couch at 2 a.m, tears streaming down his face. Sarah had forgiven him without him even asking for forgiveness. She had moved on so completely that he didn't even register as important enough to be angry at. He was just a lesson learned, a chapter closed, a stepping stone on her journey to becoming who she was meant to be. The obsession with Sarah consumed Robert for months. He started making mistakes at work, missing deadlines, losing focus in meetings. Jennifer broke up with him, frustrated with his emotional distance and his constant distraction. Robert's performance reviews suffered. His boss called him into his office in March 2006 to discuss concerns about Robert's declining productivity. "What's going on, Robert?" his boss asked, not unkindly. "You've been one of our top performers for years, but lately you seem checked out. Is everything okay at home?" "I made a mistake," Robert heard himself say, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "The worst mistake of my life. And I don't know how to fix it." His boss looked uncomfortable, clearly not expecting such a personal confession during what was supposed to be a professional conversation about work performance. "Do you want to talk about it?" "I left my wife after she became disabled," Robert said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was being honest about my limitations, about what I could handle. But I was just being a coward. And now I've realized what I lost, and it's too late to fix it." His boss was quiet for a long moment. "Robert, I'm going to be honest with you. What you just described is something you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life. There's no undoing that kind of damage. The only thing you can do is learn from it and try to be better going forward. But you can't let it destroy your present. You can't let guilt and regret consume you to the point where you can't function." "How do I live with it?" Robert asked, genuinely wanting an answer. "How do I live with knowing I'm the kind of person who would do that?" "I don't know," his boss admitted. "That's something you'll have to figure out, maybe with the help of a therapist. But what I do know is that you can't keep bringing this into work. You need to decide whether you're going to pull yourself together or whether we need to have a different kind of conversation about your future here." Robert left that meeting and went home. He called a therapist and made an appointment. Over the next 6 months, he worked on understanding his own actions, his own values, his own capacity for cruelty that he had never fully acknowledged before. The therapy helped him function at work again, helped him rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But it didn't erase the fundamental truth: he had failed the most important test of character he would ever face, and he had to live with that knowledge forever. By the fall of 2006, Robert had mostly accepted that he would never speak to Sarah again, that she was lost to him forever. And then he saw an announcement for a charity gala in New York City where Sarah would be delivering the keynote address. The event was for the Mitchell Foundation for Spinal Cord Research, an organization Sarah had founded with a $500 million donation. Tickets started at $10,000. Robert bought a ticket. He knew it was a bad idea. Knew that showing up at Sarah's event would be selfish and potentially upsetting to her. But he had to see her one more time. Had to try to apologize, to explain, to somehow make her understand that he knew what he had done and that he was sorry. He flew to New York the day before the gala, checked into an expensive hotel room he couldn't really afford, and spent 24 hours rehearsing what he would say to Sarah if he got the chance. The gala was at the Plaza Hotel, a venue so elegant and expensive that Robert felt out of place the moment he walked in. He wore his best suit, but it felt cheap compared to the tuxedos and designer gowns around him. This was Sarah's world now, a world of wealth and influence and power. A world where Robert would never belong. The ballroom was magnificent: crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, elaborate flower arrangements on every surface. There were probably 400 people in attendance, all of them wealthy donors, medical researchers, disability advocates, politicians. Robert found an empty seat at a table toward the back and waited, his heart pounding, his palms sweating. When Sarah rolled onto the stage to give her keynote address, the entire room erupted in applause. She looked stunning. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and she wore a deep emerald green dress that made her eyes shine. But more than her appearance, it was her presence that struck Robert. She radiated confidence, authority, purpose. This was not the diminished woman he had left in a guest bedroom. This was someone who had found herself, who knew her worth, who commanded respect not because of her wealth but because of her character and her actions. Sarah spoke for 30 minutes about the importance of funding spinal cord injury research, about breaking down barriers for people with disabilities, about the moral obligation of those with resources to create meaningful change in the world. Her speech was articulate, passionate, moving. People in the audience were visibly emotional. Robert couldn't stop the tears running down his face. After the speech, there was a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Then Sarah wheeled off the stage and into the reception area where guests could mingle, network, and congratulate her on the speech. Robert waited at the bar, nursing a whiskey he didn't really want, watching Sarah navigate the crowd. She moved through the room with ease, people naturally making space for her wheelchair, treating her with genuine respect and admiration. She laughed at jokes, accepted compliments graciously, discussed research strategies with scientists, posed for photos with donors. When she finally noticed Robert standing by the bar, her expression changed. The warm smile faded. Her posture stiffened slightly. She excused herself from the conversation she was having and wheeled toward him, her face carefully neutral. "Robert," she said, her voice giving away nothing. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," Robert said, his voice shaking. "I needed to talk to you." "About what?" "About everything. About what I did. About what I lost." "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake." People were starting to notice their conversation, to whisper and point. Sarah glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Let's take this somewhere private," she said, her tone clipped. She led Robert to a small room off the main ballroom, closing the door behind them. Once they were alone, she turned to face him, her expression hard. "You have 5 minutes. Say what you came to say." Robert had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, but now that it was happening, all his prepared words fled. "I didn't know," he stammered. "I didn't know about the money. About who you really were." Sarah's expression turned to ice. "And is that supposed to make it better?" The fact that you left me when you thought I had nothing. That you abandoned your wife when she became disabled because you assumed she couldn't contribute financially anymore. No, I just meant, you meant what, Robert? That if you had known I was a billionaire, you would have stayed. That money would have made my disability tolerable. That's not what I'm saying, Robert protested, though they both knew it was at least partially true. Then what are you saying? Why are you here? Robert took a deep breath, forcing himself to speak the truth he had been avoiding. I'm here because I destroyed the best thing in my life and I don't know how to live with what I've done. I'm here because I see what you've become, how you've used this experience to help others, and I'm ashamed of the person I revealed myself to be. I'm here because I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost. I understand who you are and who I failed to be. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Robert saw something in her eyes that devastated him more than anger or hatred ever could. She looked at him with pity. Robert, do you want to know what the saddest part of all this is? What? Robert whispered. The saddest part is that if I had never become disabled, we probably would have stayed married. You would have continued to take credit for my sacrifices. I would have continued to diminish myself to support your ego. We would have lived our whole lives in that pattern, and I never would have discovered who I actually am or what I'm capable of becoming. So in a twisted way, you did me a favor. By showing me your true character at the worst moment of my life, you freed me to build something real. Sarah, please what? Please forgive you. Please give you another chance. Please tell you that you're not the person you revealed yourself to be. Sarah shook her head. I can't do any of those things, Robert. Because you are exactly the person you revealed yourself to be. You're someone who loves conditionally. Someone who values what people can do for them over who they actually are. Someone who walks away when things get difficult. I've changed, Robert said desperately. I've been in therapy. I've worked on myself. I'm not that person anymore. Maybe you're not, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. Maybe you have grown and changed. I hope you have, for your own sake. But that doesn't change what happened between us. That doesn't erase the pain you caused or the damage you did. And it doesn't mean I owe you forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm not asking for reconciliation, Robert said, tears streaming down his face now. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. That I understand the magnitude of what I did. That I will spend the rest of my life regretting how I treated you. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. Robert, I believe that you're sorry. I believe that you have regrets. But your guilt is not my burden to carry. Your need for absolution is not my responsibility to provide. I've built a new life, a good life, a meaningful life. And that life has no space in it for people who see my wheelchair before they see me. I don't, yes, you do. You still do, even now. Because if I was still living in that house in Ohio, still struggling to adapt to life with a disability, still living on a modest income with no public platform or influence, would you be here? Would you have flown to New York and paid $10,000 for a ticket to this gala? Robert opened his mouth to respond, but no words came because they both knew the answer. That's what I thought, Sarah said quietly. You're here because you found out I'm a billionaire. Because you realized what you lost in financial terms. Not because you genuinely miss the person I am. That's not fair, Robert protested weakly. What's not fair is spending 18 years loving someone who only loved you conditionally. What's not fair is sacrificing your identity and your dreams for a marriage that meant nothing the moment you became disabled. But you know what? I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you showed me exactly who you are. Because it gave me the freedom to become who I was meant to be. Sarah turned her wheelchair toward the door, the conversation clearly over. Sarah, wait, Robert said, reaching out and touching her arm. The security guards who had been stationed outside the door immediately stepped forward, alerted by the physical contact. Sarah raised her hand to stop them but looked at Robert with an expression of exhausted patience. "Let me go, Robert," she said quietly. "Not just physically. Emotionally. Let me go and build your own life, your own redemption, your own meaning. But do it without me. Because I can't be part of your healing process. I have my own life to live." Robert released her arm, his hand dropping to his side. "I hope you find happiness," Sarah said, and Robert could tell she genuinely meant it. "I really do. Not because I've forgiven you, but because I've moved past you. You don't have power over my life anymore. You're not my husband. You're not my partner. You're just someone I used to know who taught me a valuable lesson about what love isn't." And with that, Sarah rolled out of the room, back into the gala where people who actually valued her were waiting, leaving Robert standing alone with the full weight of his choices pressing down on him like a physical force. He left the Plaza Hotel that night and flew back to Atlanta. He never attempted to contact Sarah again. What could he possibly say that would matter? What apology could bridge the gap between who he was and who she deserved? Robert returned to his life in Atlanta, but everything felt hollow now. He continued working at the manufacturing company, received promotions and raises, maintained a professional reputation. But the work that had once given him purpose and identity now felt meaningless. He was managing supply chains and optimizing production processes while Sarah was funding medical research that could change millions of lives. He went on dates occasionally, brief relationships with women who reminded him in small ways of Sarah. None of them lasted more than a few months. Robert would inevitably compare them to Sarah, find them lacking, or sabotage the relationship before it could become serious. His therapist pointed out the pattern. "You're punishing yourself," Dr. Morrison said during one of their sessions in 2008. "You're not allowing yourself to build meaningful connections because you don't believe you deserve them." "Maybe I don't," Robert said. "Maybe some mistakes are unforgivable." "Maybe they are," Dr. Morrison agreed, which surprised Robert. Usually therapists tried to reassure clients that everyone deserved forgiveness and redemption. But that doesn't mean you stop trying to be better. It just means you accept that some consequences are permanent. Robert thought about that conversation often over the following years. Some consequences are permanent. He had destroyed his marriage to an extraordinary woman, and that destruction would stay with him forever. But Dr. Morrison was right that he could still try to be better going forward. Robert started doing volunteer work at a local hospital, helping families navigate the overwhelming medical system when loved ones were in crisis. He donated regularly to disability advocacy organizations, always anonymously. He became more present in his relationships with his mother and siblings, people he had neglected during his years of climbing the corporate ladder. None of it absolved him of what he had done to Sarah. But it helped him live with himself, helped him feel like he was contributing something positive to the world even though he had caused such pain. Meanwhile, Sarah's influence and impact continued to grow. Robert followed her work from a distance, reading articles about her philanthropic initiatives, watching interviews she gave about disability advocacy, seeing photos of her at conferences and events around the world. In 2010, Sarah made headlines with the creation of the Mitchell Foundation for Spinal Cord Research, a $500 million commitment to funding groundbreaking research into spinal cord injuries and potential treatments. The donation was the largest single contribution in the field's history and positioned Sarah as one of the most influential philanthropists in medical research. Robert watched the press conference announcing the foundation from his apartment, Sarah's face filling his television screen as she spoke eloquently about the importance of funding research that could help future generations avoid the challenges she had faced. A reporter asked if she had any regrets about her journey from the accident to where she was now. Sarah smiled, that same confident smile Robert had seen at the New York Gala. "No regrets," she said simply. "Everything I've been through, including the painful parts, brought me here. And I like where I am. I like the work I'm doing, the people I'm surrounded by, the impact I'm making. Would I choose to go through a devastating accident and a painful divorce again if I had the choice? No. But I also wouldn't trade who I've become because of those experiences. The reporter followed up, what would you say to someone who's currently going through a spinal cord injury or facing abandonment from a partner during a medical crisis? Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression intense and compassionate. I would say this, the people who leave you during your darkest moments are revealing who they always were. They're showing you that their love was conditional, built on what you could provide rather than who you are. And while that revelation is painful, it's also valuable information. Because once you know who people really are, you can stop investing energy in relationships that don't serve you and start building connections with people who will stand beside you through anything. Robert turned off the television, unable to watch anymore. Every word Sarah spoke felt like an indictment of his character, a reminder of the worst thing he had ever done. He knew she wasn't talking about him specifically, knew she had moved so far past their relationship that he probably rarely crossed her mind. But that made it worse somehow. He was forgettable to her, a cautionary tale, a chapter in her origin story but not a significant presence in her actual life. Over the years, Robert heard occasional updates about Sarah through mutual acquaintances or media coverage. She had started a relationship with a disability rights lawyer she met at a conference in 2011. The man, whose name was David Winters, was also a wheelchair user, paralyzed from a mountain climbing accident in his 20s. Photos of Sarah and David together showed two people who understood each other's experiences, who navigated the world with similar challenges, who looked at each other with genuine love and respect. Robert felt a complicated mix of emotions seeing those photos. Part of him was genuinely happy that Sarah had found someone worthy of her. Part of him was devastated that it wasn't him, that he had proven himself unworthy. And part of him recognized the painful irony. Sarah had ended up with a partner who used a wheelchair, with someone whose disability was more severe than hers in some ways. The difference was that David saw Sarah as an equal partner, not as a burden or an inconvenience. He loved her for who she was, disability and all. By 2015, Robert was 56 years old, still working at the same company, still living alone in Atlanta. He had built a comfortable but ultimately unsatisfying life. He had money in the bank, a nice apartment, a decent social circle. But he had no real intimacy, no deep connections, no sense of purpose beyond going through the motions of a successful career. His mother died that year, peacefully in her sleep at 83. Robert flew to Kentucky for the funeral and spent a week sorting through her belongings. He found old photo albums from his wedding to Sarah, pictures of two young people who looked so hopeful and full of possibility. Robert barely recognized himself in those photos. The man in the wedding pictures had kind eyes, a genuine smile, an openness that the current Robert had lost somewhere along the way. He also found letters his mother had written but never sent, drafted on her old typewriter and tucked into a desk drawer. One of them was addressed to Robert, written shortly after his divorce from Sarah. The letter was brutal in its honesty. Robert, I don't know what happened to the kind boy I raised. The son I knew would never abandon his wife when she needed him most. You've become someone I don't recognize, someone who values success and appearance over basic human decency. I'm ashamed of what you did to Sarah, and I'm heartbroken that you don't seem to understand the magnitude of your failure. You didn't just lose a wife. You lost your integrity. I hope you find a way to get it back, but I'm not sure you can. Robert sat on his mother's bedroom floor, clutching that letter and sobbing. His mother had known. Had judged him. Had been ashamed of him. And she had never told him to his face because she had hoped he would figure it out himself, that he would become the man she raised him to be. But he hadn't. He had remained the man who walked away from Sarah, who chose convenience over commitment, who revealed his character at the worst possible moment. After the funeral, Robert made a decision. He sold his apartment in Atlanta, took early retirement from the manufacturing company, and moved to a small town in North Carolina. Not Chapel Hill where Sarah lived, but a town about an hour away. He wanted to be in the same general area without intruding on her life or space. He bought a modest house, started volunteering full-time at a local hospital and disability resource center, and lived quietly. He never married again. Never even seriously dated. He had his work at the hospital, a few close friends, his volunteer commitments. It was a simple life, a life of service rather than ambition. He hoped it counted for something, hoped it balanced at least a fraction of the damage he had caused. On the 10th anniversary of his divorce from Sarah, Robert wrote her a letter. He didn't send it, knew she wouldn't want to hear from him. But he wrote it anyway, needing to articulate the things he had never properly said. The letter read, "Dear Sarah, it's been 10 years since our divorce, and I've spent every single day of that decade living with the knowledge of what I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even ask for it. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that you were the best person I will ever know, and I destroyed the most valuable relationship of my life because I was too shallow, too proud, too focused on appearances to see what really mattered. I understand that when you needed me most, I failed every test of character and commitment. I revealed myself to be exactly the kind of person you feared I might be, the kind who loved conditionally and valued you for what you could provide rather than who you were. I've tried to become better. I've spent years in therapy, volunteering, trying to make amends in small ways that don't directly involve you. But nothing I do erases what I did. Nothing changes the fact that I abandoned my wife when she became disabled. I saw your recent interview about the Mitchell Foundation's new research initiatives. You spoke about the importance of funding studies that could help people with spinal cord injuries regain function. I hope that research succeeds. I hope someday there's a treatment that could help you walk again if that's something you want. Not because your life isn't valuable and complete exactly as it is, but because you deserve every possibility. I also saw photos of you and David at the Foundation Gala. You look happy. Really happy, in a way I never made you happy even in our best years. I'm glad you found someone who sees you the way you deserve to be seen all along. Thank you for the years we had together, even though I didn't appreciate them at the time. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for being the kind of person who could move forward with grace instead of bitterness. And most of all, thank you for teaching me what real strength looks like. It's not financial success or career advancement or any of the things I used to value. It's the ability to rebuild yourself after everything falls apart, to use pain as fuel for purpose, to choose generosity over revenge. I hope wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you know that you changed my life. Not in the way a good partner should, because I failed to be that for you. But by showing me through your example what character and grace actually look like. I'm sorry, Sarah. For all of it. Always, Robert. He folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and placed it in a box with other letters he had written to Sarah over the years but never sent. Maybe someday after he died, someone would find these letters and deliver them to her. Or maybe they would be thrown away, unread and unimportant. Either way, Robert felt slightly better having written down the things he needed to say, even if Sarah would never hear them. So here's what I want to know from you. How does this story make you feel? Are you angry at Robert for what he did? Do you think Sarah should have told him about her wealth from the beginning? What would you have done in Robert's position? And more importantly, what would you have done in Sarah's position? Could you have shown that same grace and strength? Could you have rebuilt your life so completely after such devastating betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. And if you know someone who's going through a difficult time, someone who's facing abandonment or betrayal or a life-changing medical crisis, share this video with them. Sometimes people need to see stories of survival and strength to believe their own recovery is possible. If this story touched you, if it made you think about love and loyalty and what really matters in relationships, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We share real stories about real people, stories that challenge you to think about your own values and choices. Thank you for watching this journey with me. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next video. 5 years after Robert moved to North Carolina, he received an unexpected phone call. It was from Marcus Thompson, Sarah's financial advisor, though Robert didn't know that at first. Mr. Hayes, the voice on the phone said. This is Marcus Thompson. I'm calling on behalf of Sarah Mitchell. Robert's heart stopped. Is she okay? Did something happen? She's fine, Marcus assured him. But she wanted me to reach out to you about something. Sarah is writing a memoir about her experiences with disability, philanthropy, and personal transformation. She wanted to give you the opportunity to read the sections about your marriage and divorce before the book is published. She's not asking for your approval or permission, but she thought it would be fair to let you know what she's planning to share publicly. Robert felt nauseated. What does she say about me? I haven't read the manuscript myself. But she wanted you to know that she's told the truth about what happened, including the parts that are unflattering to her own choices. She's not portraying you as a villain, just as a person who made choices that revealed his character. When is the book coming out? Robert asked. In 6 months. I can send you the relevant sections if you want to read them. Yes, Robert said. Please send them. The manuscript sections arrived via email the next day. Robert read them 3 times, crying through most of it. Sarah had told their story with brutal honesty but also with compassion. She acknowledged her own mistakes in hiding her wealth, questioned whether that choice had set up their marriage for failure, discussed the pain of being abandoned during her most vulnerable moment. But she also wrote about Robert as a whole person, not just as the man who left her. She mentioned the early years when he was kind and supportive, acknowledged the pressures he faced trying to provide for a family when he came from poverty, recognized that his failure wasn't malicious but cowardly. She wrote, Robert wasn't a bad person. He was a weak person. And when faced with a situation that required extraordinary strength, he chose the path of least resistance. I don't hate him for that. I pity him for it. Because in choosing his own comfort over our partnership, he lost something valuable that he can never get back. Robert called Marcus after reading the sections. Tell Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion, tell her thank you. For being more fair to me than I ever was to her. And tell her I'm proud of what she's built, what she's become, what she's accomplished. Not that my pride matters to her, but I want her to know anyway. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'll tell her, Mr. Hayes. I'll tell her. Sarah's memoir, titled Walking Forward, A Journey from Betrayal to Purpose, was published in 2021 and became an instant bestseller. It was honest, moving, inspiring. Critics praised Sarah's willingness to examine her own choices alongside the actions of others. Disability advocates celebrated seeing a realistic portrayal of adapting to spinal cord injury. And countless readers wrote to Sarah about how her story helped them navigate their own experiences with betrayal, medical crises, and the challenge of rebuilding after everything falls apart. Robert bought a copy on the day it was released. He read it cover to cover in one sitting, then read it again more slowly, taking notes in the margins, letting Sarah's words wash over him. The book ended with Sarah's current life, her relationship with David, her philanthropic work, her continued advocacy for disability rights. She wrote about finding joy and purpose and meaning in a life that looked completely different from what she had imagined at 22 when she first met Robert in that library. In the final chapter, she wrote, People sometimes ask me if I've forgiven my ex-husband for leaving me when I became disabled. The question assumes that forgiveness is something I owe him, something he needs from me to move forward. But I've realized that forgiveness is not about him. It's about me. It's about releasing the hold that experience had on my life, about choosing to define myself by who I've become rather than what was done to me. So have I forgiven him? I don't know. Maybe. But more importantly, I've moved beyond needing to answer that question. He's not part of my life anymore, not a presence in my thoughts or my emotional landscape. He's just a character in my origin story, someone who appeared at a crucial moment and taught me what I needed to learn about strength, independence, and the difference between love and convenience. Robert closed the book and sat in his quiet house, surrounded by evidence of a life that was good enough but not great, meaningful enough but not extraordinary. He had learned his lesson. Had become a better person. had dedicated his later years to service and self-improvement.